So we come now to the final section, or the final large paragraph of Romans 9, 10, and 11. And we're left with the question, is it the case that Israel has stumbled in order that they might fall, meaning might utterly collapse, so that they're completely not in any way in view when it comes to God's ultimate program for the restoration of the world? Is the nation of Israel as a nation, for all practical purposes, toast? There's just no, they play no role whatsoever going forward. And what we find out, of course, is that that's not the case. It says here, by no means. Rather, through their trespass, salvation has come to the Gentiles, so as to make Israel jealous. That is to say that Paul envisions the mass conversion of Gentiles as at some point going to have an impact on that nation of Israel in the future. Now, if their trespass means the riches for the world, meaning if Israel's disobedience has led to the gospel blessing going out to all the nations of the Gentiles, and if their failure means riches to the Gentiles, how much more will their full inclusion mean? So Paul envisions a day when there will be a full restoration. And he comments on that a little bit farther ahead here. I'll just skip the part about the Gentiles for a moment, where he says, I don't want you to be unaware of this mystery, brothers. A partial hardening has come upon Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in. So the hardening is partial, and it is only until. So there'll be a point where that hardening en masse is removed, and that will come whenever the fullness of the Gentiles has come in. So at some point, it hasn't happened yet, still, there will be a point where the fullness of the Gentiles, of the Gentile converts, will come in. And that means at that point, there'll be some response from the nation of Israel as a whole, en masse, meaning a large number of Jews would then convert to believing that Jesus is the Messiah. So that's how Paul envisions it, and the future that is for the nation of Israel, that God's promises, just to go a little bit farther ahead here, where he says God's gifts and calling are irrevocable. That is, they are not revoked. So the promises God made to that nation will, like through the prophets, the vision of the end, where they're part of the great restoration of the world, that those will still come true. And that the way we should look at it now is that God has simply consigned everyone, Jew and Gentile, to disobedience so that he might have mercy on all. That is to say that God has orchestrated history in order to create these mass conversion moments because God wants to. He desires to have mercy upon us all. And that's why he finishes by saying, oh, the depths of the riches and wisdom and knowledge of God. You know, who of us has suggested to God this idea that he should orchestrate history around creating the maximum number of people to show mercy to? This is who God is. This is what God is like. And it may at times seem like that's not what he's doing. It certainly didn't feel that way to the Apostle Paul and many Christians in the first century A.D. as they saw so few Jews converted to belief in Jesus as Messiah, but there were so many Gentiles coming in. But that was a blessing for this particular era, and this will end. Now, just to go back and address the main question I gave you, which is the addressing of the Gentiles. He says, I'm speaking to you Gentiles. And what does he have to say to them? Well, he wants to warn them. He wants to say, do not be arrogant toward the branches. Do not become proud. And then this last one, don't be wise in your own sight. What is he talking about? Why is he addressing Gentiles like this? Well, the danger was that Gentile Christians would start thinking that they were the true and ultimate goal of God's program of salvation, and that the Jews were second-rate. They were the rejects, and therefore they could be sort of sidelined and maltreated even. And so Paul reminds them that the dough offered as first fruits is holy, so is the whole lump. Now, what is he referring to? He's talking about how the Israelites, particularly the patriarchs and so on, if they were the first fruits of God's program for the restoration of the world, and they were accepted by God, and if the root is holy, so are the branches, then it means what comes later is accepted as well. We, Gentiles, I'm a Gentile, if we were, Paul says, a wild olive shoot, and we have been grafted into this olive tree. The olive tree, of course, is the program God began with Israel. We have been grafted into it, and we get the blessings out of it. For example, it wasn't a Gentile who wrote Psalm 23, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." It wasn't a Gentile who wrote Isaiah 53 about the coming suffering of the Messiah. All of these scriptures and God's dealing with Israel, the Gentile Christians have entered into that blessing and should be grateful for that and should fear, because the reason that some of these branches were broken off is because of unbelief. They were broken off because of their unbelief. You stand through faith. So the Gentile Christians need to be, Paul's warning them, need to be very guarded about becoming arrogant and thinking that they're really God's blue-eyed favorite. Now, when Paul wrote this in the first century A.D., you wish you could have been there crying out to all the Gentile Christians to take this part of Romans very, very seriously. When the Protestant Reformation happened, you wish that you could have been there shouting at Martin Luther to make sure he doesn't fail to heed the warnings of Romans chapter 11, which he did fail to heed, because he said some very harsh things against the Jews. So Christians, Gentile Christians, have in many ways failed to heed this really stern warning from the Apostle Paul about the attitude of Gentile Christians toward Jews. And of course, this isn't characterized most of the church as today, but across history, it's been very sad. And so be sure, as a Gentile Christian, to take heed very seriously to these warnings about your attitude toward the nation, toward Israelites, toward Jews, and that remember that God has a plan for that nation still to be included in the great restoration of the world. Now, the question for Romans chapter 12, the next major section, is going to be twofold. First, he says that it's the mercies of God that causes him, or that he wants to be the basis of his appeal to his readers, to his Christian readers, to serve God. So the mercies of God. Why does he make this appeal based on mercies, the mercies of God? And then, secondly, what are the two areas, rather, that he's going to talk about? Our bodies, presenting our bodies, and then our minds. And the question I have is, does it matter that the bodies are to be offered first and the mind is to be offered second? Does that matter that it's in that order? And if so, why? So best wishes, and we'll see you next time.